All right, welcome. This is going to be very confusing. Hopefully you can hear me. I guess that's one of the questions. If you're on YouTube Live and you're listening to this, let me know. And otherwise, I am joining the voice channel live meetings. Hello, everybody. Is everybody here? Is anybody here? Oh, I have to. Okay. Well, the question is could someone unmute their mic over in the Discord and let me know that they are in fact hearing this? Okay, great. Oh, we're all having wonderful, wonderful technical challenges to everything this semester. This is great. How are all the other classes going on? Is anyone over on YouTube Live? Because this is... Wait, what? I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first time something. Okay, well, I aim to please here. So I'm going to be recording this, and I guess I'm not going to stream this to Twitch because people are on YouTube Live as well. Okay, quite a few people over there. Okay, hello. First YouTube Live class, yes. So everyone can hear me over on there as well as on Discord. Crazy. I got some @mentions up here. So let's see. How's your week's been? It's been like forever. We haven't seen anyone because of the whole Monday is not Monday thing, right? Is that no? Tuesday was Wednesday, and 2-for-1 deal on, I don't know. I'm just, never mind. I'm being silly. It happens. It's like the only thing worse than dad humor is professor humor. So they say. Something like that. So let's see. Okay, we're going to try to do things. I know last time we definitely had some issues with the quality of the Discord video. So that is going to be the most important thing is if things totally go bad, type it right away in Discord so that I know that, so I should try to figure out something, because it could just as easily be on your end as my end or somewhere in between. So it's going to be kind of challenging to make sure that we're kind of dealing with that in the right way. So we'll do our best to get there. And Unity is slowly loading in the background. Unity 2020 seems to be really, that's the one thing I have to worry or to complain about with regards to Unity 2020. It does take a bit more. So questions, first off. Now, so last time we met, we talked a lot about sort of very, very general game engine, sort of game development, kind of architectural issues. And by that, I mean, how are things organized, right? We have this notion of the Unity game engine, or it could be any game engine. And then within the game engine, we have things called scenes, which is sort of, the things we're going to build as sort of being the, our project or our scene or our level, kind of a view into the world at some particular point. Yeah, they are not synced. You should see what it looks like on my desktop right now. Yes, YouTube Live and Twitch take considerably longer. They are not synchronized. There's lots of lag over there. So it's frightening. You'll get echoes and stuff set up. So anyway, so platforms like most game engines or game development systems, you have some sort of engine which has an architecture, and then it has a scene in it that we're going to be working in to kind of put our kind of main objects and the things the player is going to be using is going to be in that scene. And then within that scene, we have certain objects. It could be things like, it could ultimately be, say, oh, the player or an enemy or the environment or the terrain or a tree or a dog or a tank or things like that, that are these sort of higher level objects. Some of them might also be things like, the game manager or, things like that, some, higher order kind of things. And then those objects will generally have components on them, or things that we're going to put on them that really are the things that really do the work, right? They're going to be components that do things like implement the physics or implement collision detection or run some bit of code or play background music or do those sort of things. So we have components that live at the lower level. Now, certain architectures, if you've been in Godot or you've been into Unreal or other game engines, it's a little bit different, but fundamentally you have these ideas, this sort of organization of how things are, okay? So in Unity, we have scenes, we have objects, we have components on them, okay? Now, I'm going to switch over here. Let's see if I can do this seamlessly now. Boom, there we go. That was pretty seamless, right? And this is Unity over here. So I've got Unity, and I'm going to attempt this kind of weird thing in the corner. I don't know if you can see that. You probably can see that. I guess it doesn't really need to be there. I'm going to leave it there. This kind of funky little thing allows me to draw on the screen. So that's the fun part that we'll kind of hopefully deal with and make life even easier. So, yes. Well, I'm using Unity 2020. Now, do you have the dark mode in yours as well, Unity 2020? Right, okay. Yes, I'm in the game tab at the moment. If I go to scene, whoops, I have to switch over here. If I go to scene, it'll look a little different, right? Is that what you got? Okay. All right, let me give you we're going to give another rundown, another tour of Unity here, because hopefully we have a nice clean feed, as they say. So I've got Unity open, and there's, we have a single window at the moment, which doesn't mean we will always just have a single window. We can actually open up things, but let's kind of look at what we have. And I mentioned that we have this thing here called the scene, right? Pardon my bad handwriting there, but here's the scene window over here. And you'll notice there's the hint. It's the scene window over there. And then the scene actually lives in a project, which is where all of these things live. And you'll notice over here, this thing called a project, right? And if we are careful, we can actually see, okay, this scene is actually the main scene. We see that over here. Right, and main is over here. So the main is part of this project, right? So there's the main. So we're kind of looking at it at multiple dimensions here, sort of, or multiple depths, right? We see a view of the scene, which doesn't have anything really visible in it yet, right? But the scene called main lives in our project in the scene folder, right? We got that one? Okay. And I'm not too good with erasing, but let's see if I can. All right. So here we are sitting in Unity. We have the scene window, which has also, interestingly, a bunch of stuff in the scene window, but you just really can't see. It's got this main camera. It has a canvas, which is a weird thing. You probably remember a little bit about the canvas from last time. The canvas is sort of this kind of bizarre alternative view of the world that is overlaid on top of the camera. So two objects that are already in our scene. One is this main camera, which is our view into the game. All right, so imagine a camera that lets you look into this game world. And then we have this canvas that I've added. You don't see that by default, but I've added a canvas that's going to be an overlay on top of that so that I can communicate with the player sort of at the you know, the Jarvis Iron Man heads-up display sort of level, right? That's what the canvas's purpose is. It's to be that overlay of extra information and interaction that's not really part of the world, but allows me to kind of directly interface and interact with the user in some kind of special way, right? So that's kind of what that's about. Is that a question? I hear somebody, maybe it's just a mic open. That's okay. All right. So we have the canvas, we have the camera, we have this sort of scene called main that we're working in here. All right. Now, for the first project, what we wanted to do is kind of have, for those of you who've read and look back at the notes from the last one, we talked about developing our first game in such a way that it really has almost no graphical elements, almost no objects really in the game, but we're going to rely a lot on this canvas for starters in the game, because it's quite honestly, it's one of the easiest ways to sort of interact with the user in a very, very explicit, predictable kind of way, which is why I like to start there. And ultimately, all games usually have some sort of canvas, and maybe it's even just the sort of thing that you just use as your intro screen to the game, but ultimately it's there anyway. So occasionally now, if I have this set up, hopefully I have this set up right. Let's see, if I do a poll over the question now, if you're watching on YouTube Live, you won't see this. So if you are on YouTube Live, you should probably just keep the chat, the text chat over in Discord open. I'll occasionally pause or ask things over there. So like, for instance, do you have Unity open? Because ideally, the next bit I'd like to do with sort of, you know, with Unity at the ready. It's not all that important for you to, and I could even do this in such a way that it's not quite as important for you to see the screen once we get sort of the first parts kicked off. But we'll sort of imagine we're dealing with that. So it's good to have that. If you don't have Unity, well, you can later on come back and watch this recorded version, or you know, just try to remember where we were. Your computer refuses to download the hub or Unity. That we'll have to check offline with that. Oh, let's see. I just got a message about a new version of Unity being, I'm going to skip that one. Downloads that you may have to clear out some stuff on your computer to do that. We'll have to double check. We're not going to be able to, we'll have to do that afterward. Because debugging just yours while everybody's watching would be awkward and uncomfortable for everybody. But we'll come back to that. We will definitely come back to that. Refuses to download the hub. All right. Double check that you've actually set up an account and that you're downloading the right version for your computer. That's the only thing I can think of offhand, but we can look at your screen together later. I think it's going to be maybe the easiest way to do it. So, all right, for everybody else, or you can watch this after and hopefully go through. Pardon me, my phone rang. We can, if you are starting up Unity for the first time, chances are you might just see an empty screen. So if I said new scene here in Unity, I'll just call this now empty scene, for example, and I double click on that, I wind up with an empty scene here. Okay, an empty scene has nothing but a camera in it by default, right? Not a lot going on in the scene. It's an empty scene. If I do, what I'd like to do is double click on the main camera right away so I can see sort of what's in the camera view here. And for the heck of it, just for the heck of it, so you see what's going on, you can, let's see, what can we put in the scene? Let's actually, I'm not going to add anything to the scene. I'm not going to put anything in the scene. Let's do this. So we have an empty scene. We have no camera in it. Well, let's put something in it. So we'll say, okay, I'm going to open here. I'm right clicking the mouse here to get to this menu. And I'm going to add an empty object into the scene. So I'm going to add a game object that really has nothing. I can't even see it. So if I press play and the game played, I don't see anything. It's just, you see it go into play mode and I just see nothing but nothing there, right? So a game object doesn't have to be something that is necessarily visible. So I'm going to call that game object game manager, as a matter of fact. It might be useful to have something that's going to put stuff in the game that may not be visible. So we have an object now in the game that's at the origin 0, 0, and it's at -10 z, y. It's a 2D game, so I'm really mostly concerned about this x and y. And it's at that position in the world. So I have something called a game manager, which is an empty object that has nothing but a transformation on it. So like we did last time, though, I want to say, well, okay, I want to have some way of interacting with the user, and the basic form of interaction I wanted to do was through the canvas. So I'm going to create UI elements in order to work with the canvas. So I can say UI, and I'm going to say I want a button. Now, you may get this screen and be completely freaked out by this. I know some people, the first time it happens, you're like, oh my gosh, there's a ginormous button there. A terrifying and ginormous button. And some people's first inclination is to shrink that down somehow, to turn that into a button that I can somehow deal with. Because look at it, it's crazy, it's huge, it's ugly, it's phenomenally bad. Yes. I added an empty object and I just named it Game Manager. Okay. So there's no such thing really as a game manager other than the one I build. I'm going to build the game manager. Okay. All right. So I have this bizarre, huge button that it looks like it's going to take up some corner of the screen, and it makes absolutely no sense whatsoever unless I go to the game view. So now we can see, okay, here's the scene, here's the game view. And now suddenly I can see this button here at the bottom. Right? And you may have noticed over here, the main camera view, which is the view of the world, which I'm also, is the same view as over here. I see that blue screen. I don't see that button over here, right? I'm just seeing the main camera view over here. And that's because the main camera is really my view into the game world. And the canvas is something that is overlaid on top of the game world. Right, so this is an important topic, important concept to get, that we have these kind of two things working together to present the information to the player. Right, we have the main camera, which gives them a view into the world, and then we have the canvas, which is a sort of an information and user interface that's happening on top of the world. Right, because the user isn't going in and clicking buttons that exist in the world. There's going to be a real world there, and objects that live in there, and gremlins and cars and tanks and trucks and all that kind of stuff. But buttons don't live in the real world, but they do live in that Jarvis heads-up display overlay kind of thing. All right. So typically, we're not going to worry about this kind of weird object here. And the one way to kind of not worry about it is most of the time when you're working on your game, if we double click on the canvas, we see it. What I like to do is make sure I don't leave buttons way down in that corner to freak out the game. So I grab them and I can click on any object and I can move it using this move tool here. Right. So I have this button that I've created and I can move it around using the move tool. I'm going to put it at the center of the screen. Okay. So this is a very special object. There are objects that are set up for us ahead of time that have certain components already on them. And sometimes they're even made of hierarchies of multiple objects, right? A hierarchy is sort of a family tree, right? So we see, for example, now let's talk about, someone had asked about organization. I'm not sure if this is exactly what they meant, but this is the organization we'll talk about, that the scene is organized as a tree. Right? There's the empty scene, which is the root of the tree. That is sort of you can almost think of it as a zone object that contains all of the other objects that are in the scene. And then objects in that scene can have components on them, or they can actually even have children that are other objects that live within that kind of subtree. Okay. Now, one way to think about that is sort of like, well, imagine, chances are all of you have had parents at one point or another, and those parents had hair or eyes or some kind of distinguishing traits, right? But they also had children. This might be you. And you also have certain components and traits that you have in common with them, or perhaps they're independent. You don't have the same eyes as the ones your parents have had. So it's sort of the same idea with these kind of trees, in that, objects can have children that are objects in and of themselves. And, so everybody can have components, but everyone can also have these kind of hierarchical parent and child relationships. As weird as that sounds, does it make sense? Is that, okay. All right. So we have multiple kinds of things. So you can have a component which sort of belongs to you, that's part of you, but then you can have a child that you're associated with, that you have a hierarchy and you have some manner of control over, that also has components, and so on and so on and so on. Okay. So then now we're kind of understanding this hierarchy a little bit more. All right. So for example, our button here. Our button is a very interesting object that is made up of has certain things like directly on the button. It has this image, which is this UI sprite that is actually, determining that rounded buttony thing. And then certain behavior like the clickableness of the button. But interesting thing, not all buttons necessarily need to have text, do they? A button could be an image. A button might just, all of the information about this button might be on that button image. So it wouldn't need its text. Right? So maybe I would just say, well, this text here, I could just delete it. Right? Now I have a button that just has an image and it has no text on it. Slightly confusing, perhaps. Maybe I should undo that. And now I have the button again, right? And even I can select the button and I could even move the text independently, because it is a child and it has a relationship to its parent. But a certain amount of it, is independent. Now, the weird thing or fun thing, because of that relationship, if I move this button text, which is a child of the button, but then I decide, okay, let me move the button text still moves with the button, even though it's not on top of it, because this physical on topness of it really isn't what's important. It's this relationship here. Kind of neat, right? So I can go ahead and I can move that back on here. So now my button child is visibly on top of my actual button. So my text child is on top of my button, which is the real thing that's important just now. Okay. And that lives on top of the canvas. So even if I turn the canvas on and off, the canvas is the parent of the button and any other UI objects I put on the screen. The canvas is sort of a special relationship with all the UI elements. So if I even try to add a UI element down here, like another button, for example, it automatically or magically is already assigned to be a child of the canvas, because it knows UI elements are supposed to be on the canvas. You really should only have, I'm not sure you can even put multiple canvases on the same. Never really tried to do that. Oh, maybe try. Okay. No, I don't see another canvas there. Oh, I do. Yeah, you can do that, but you don't want to do that. All right, don't put another canvas. That's confusing. So we have these two buttons. Now, buttons are nice to deal with. I like dealing with buttons because it introduces in a sort of sneaky way this concept of what we call events and triggers or signals inside of Unity. And that certain actions on one object or on one component can trigger behaviors or functionality in another, right? Things are going to interact with one another. And that's obviously in a game, you're going to want things like that to happen. So that's important. So that's why I like to kind of introduce those right away. And also, having a good UI is always a good thing in a game. So we have these two buttons. I've now placed both of them, these two buttons. And if I go into game mode, I press play. Not a heck of a lot happens as a result of them being there. And I can kind of click on them and you see a little bit of a visible interaction, which is fine. Cool. All right. But no text, no script, nothing fantastic is happening. And here's where I like to introduce the wonderful world of programming, which is, after all, what we're here to talk about, or specifically C# programming. And because we're kind of doing a review here, I'm not going to get a lot into the Bolt side of things. We want to make sure we get the kind of the basics of C# programming first, and then we'll talk about Bolt next. But so let's talk about C#, right? So C# is the scripting language that's built into Unity for purposes of development. That doesn't necessarily mean, I mean, a lot of the code that you run in components is actually C# code, even if you didn't write them. But it's not to say that, C# is the only language you can use in Unity either. It just happens to be kind of the most common one and sort of the fundamental one. So C# is kind of one of the main programming language we use in Unity. Okay. So say we were to want to write a script because we want to have something happen. We want to do the classic hello world, right? If you've ever taken a programming course, you'll know that typically what our first goal is always to do the hello world kind of thing. To let us know that the computer has understood what we intended it to do and it can perform some action on our behalf, get it to do something for us. Right? That's the reason we write hello world. Because right now, I don't know if it's paying attention to me at all. It could be ignoring me for all I know. Probably not, but maybe it is. So oddly, because of last time, I have this bit of script down here called hello world. And that's just sitting there doing nothing. Or maybe it's attached to other objects in other scenes, right? Now, what this assets folder is here, that's part of project. We saw that we had this hierarchy up here, which is the scene I'm looking at here. Now, over here, this project may look a lot like another hierarchy, but in fact, all it is, well, it is a hierarchy, but all it really is a directory on your hard drive. Okay. The project is literally a file, a directory on your hard drive. Right. So if I were to say, let's see, pictures here, for example, and I right click on there and I said, show in Explorer, because I'm on Windows, and it's going to open on the other monitor, of course. It takes me to this folder, which is GSAS 2540 Fall 2020, which is just a folder I set up. And then this particular project is called Fall 2020 GSAS 2540. And I am in the assets directory, right? Here's assets, and here's everything that's in there, along with some meta information that it sort of hides that I don't really need to know about, right? Don't mess with the meta. That's metaphysical stuff. There's also the packages directory, which I may have installed additional packages. Don't really worry about that too much yet. We're going to be mostly focused on this assets directory. And I did not mean to click that button. I meant to do this. All right, get back over there. Nope, that's not going to work. All right, quickly. The assets folder, if I do come up here, you'll see there is a bit more stuff here that it's hiding as I viewed there. My project settings, my OBJs, logs, library, and user settings, and so on. So it's really not showing you everything in here, but the project really consists of everything that's in there. It's just trying to show you stuff that you're really interested in, and using to build your game in here. I'm not going to go in here and like mess with my project settings and drag those into my game. That's not what that's about. These are the things I'm going to use in my game, which is why they're there. All right, but that's the relationship, right? This hierarchy represents some portion of the hierarchy that is your project on your disk there. Okay, make sense? All right, I'm assuming it does. So there it is. What I like to do is I organize things into kind of subfolders inside of assets. You may not have a scripts directory or an images directory or pictures directory or even a prefab directory. I think you start off with just the scenes directory. which you can just create scenes in. I like to create a scripts directory and like put my scripts in there so I know where they are. This is all pretty arbitrary. Unity, you can even move things around after the fact, and Unity will just find stuff. It's really good at that. That's one nice thing about Unity. Find stuff really easily, so I can move things around like that. This hello world in another script, those should be in the script directory. So I'm gonna just whoops. Well, I double clicked. Sorry, double clicked a little quick there, and don't worry. There we go. We'll push that off the screen for now. But I can push these up into the scripts folder, and Unity will still be able to find it. Even if I'm referencing it somewhere, it will magically find it and do the right thing, which is kind of cool of it. So I can reorganize stuff on the fly if I want. I recommend you keep things organized from the get-go. So come up with use lots and lots of, appropriate folders right away. So I just wanted to hide those so you didn't see them. Anyway, so I've got these buttons, and I want to make them do the hello world thing. And I have some choices. If I want to create a script, I can either go ahead and create a script just in here using create script, C# script specifically. I could do that. Or if I know it's a script that I'm really developing using for a specific game object or as a component of a certain game object, I could go ahead and create it right there. Now, you'll notice I've created this thing called Game Manager. A little bit of foreshadowing there. That I want to manage the things that are in the game here, and most things, I'm going to have that being sort of the central place that's going to manage my game, right? Was that obvious? Hopefully it was. Should make sense. So I'm going to go ahead and say, this is a good place. This object here should be the one that has my script components for managing the game on it. Because if I just create a script component, it's not going to do anything because it's not in the scene. It has to be part of an object to really be part of a scene and do anything in the world. So I'm going to say add component. And in here, you should see somewhere scripts. And you'll notice I can choose scripts that are there if I wanted to. Or there's no real like new scripts thing here. I could say, I'm going to call this my game manager script. Game manager. So it sees that, yeah, there is no game manager. You must want to create a new script. So I'll say, okay. And now it's making sure, I'm going to call it game manager. Be careful in how you name things here, because there's going to be a bit of code that has to match this name. So choose wisely, double check your spelling. My capitalization look good? Okay, good. Create an ad. So it is now creating a script called Game Manager. And you'll see it has added this Game Manager script component here. Right? There it is. Where does it live? Well, that's a good question. Where is that script really? You notice it just drew my attention over here. When I clicked on it, right? I click over here, I see it light up over here. It's saying, over in assets, you just created that script. And the one cool thing about Game Manager scripts is that it automatically gives it this little gear. And that's just a nice thing. That's all it does. It's just a nice thing. It's not important. So they assume that maybe you want to have something called Game Manager with a cool gear next to it, which I just love. So I'm going to put that in the scripts directory, and now it lives in the scripts directory. And if I double click on the scripts directory, you'll see it's happily in there with a little bit of a different icon than the others because it's named Game Manager. Neat, right? So there it lives. Now, everybody following so far? Let's go back, click on the Game Manager, and we see Game Manager. So I want to do something with that script. I want to edit that script. I want it to do something meaningful. I'm going to double click on that script. And if you could see my other monitor, which I'll just drag this down here for you so you can, or you can see at least what was running on the other monitor, there is a GameManager.cs file now. So that's the one it's created. That is this template it has made for my script file for me. So it's automatically done certain things. And you'll see it has created a public class game manager. So every component is a class, is a public class, meaning other things can see it. That's what public means. It means it's out there for everybody to see. It is a class, meaning it's going to contain certain amounts of functionality and data, right? It's a class component. It's called Game Manager. This has to match that name of the file, gamemanager.cs. It has to be called Game Manager, or else it will complain and be upset. So if you rename the file, you have to also rename this here, the class. Those have to match. And it has this part here, which is now we're learning a little bit of C#. So we're saying this class that we've just created here inherits from some other class called monobehavior. And a monobehavior is the template for a component in Unity, right? All components are based on these monobehaviors. And it's put a bit of other template code in here saying, okay, you're going to be probably using some system variables and system structures, collections and generics. And because you are working in Unity and you are a monobehavior, you have to say that I'm using Unity Engine. That just kind of lets it know that, yeah, this is special to Unity. This is using the monobehavior, and that comes from this Unity Engine. Right, so here's where we are. We have a class that's been created. It's called Game Manager. It's a component of Unity, is a proper component. And it even goes so far as to put a little bit of functionality in there for us ahead of time. A start function and an update function. Okay. So in one of these scripts, the start function is a routine that gets run immediately when this thing comes into existence. So as soon as the scene starts to play, it's going to go and sort of activate everybody in that scene, and it will call everybody's start function. Right. So this is a C# function. You'll notice it has these two curly braces here. Talked a little bit about last time. These establish the scope of this function. Unlike Python or other languages where you decide the scope of the function based on how tabbed in it is and so on, things that belong to this function have to be within these curly parentheses. Is everybody getting? Boy, everybody is so quiet. You have to let me know you're still alive, that I'm not. Okay. Because I worry that my stream wall just crashed and I'm totally alone here and I've just been talking to no one for an hour. So that's the reality of it. That's the scary part. That's why I do occasionally like hearing some noise or seeing some faces. So some chatter. All right. So this is sort of the most basic template for a C# function or method. In this case, it's a method because it belongs to a class. This is what the terminology I like to enforce. All right. A function is something that lives on its own, but you can have a function within a class that is basically a method of that class, right? Sort of belongs there. So you'll sometimes I'll unfortunately interchangeably use the two, but for the most part, we'll be okay. So think of this as where the functionality gets implemented within this class, right? So this is called start. You'll notice it doesn't say public here, which means this is something that is by default. If it's not public, it's private. It's private to a class. That's one of the things we like to do in object-oriented programming is we like to hide things. We like to have them hidden from the rest of the world so nobody messes with them. Nobody messes with our stuff because by default it is private. It is also void. What void means is that this function doesn't return any information. It doesn't return any value, right? You'll see nothing in here that says return or just a number at the end saying whatever. So this could potentially do something but doesn't return any information, and it is private, hidden within our Game Manager class. Right, so that's the basic thing. Now I could add a new function in here. I could say void my function or my method, whatever I want to call it, method. Now you'll see, oh, it didn't. entirely do the right thing. Sometimes it'll do the real right thing and it'll even give me curly braces. If I put that first curly brace there, it'll give me a second one because it'll say, oh, okay, they should be matched, right? Things have to match within this. Now, depending on who you want to fight, you can determine that this first curly brace should either be on the same line as the name or it should be on its own line. That wars have been fought over that level of code formatting. Welcome to the world of computer science and what programmers really spend their time arguing about. It's true. It's true. You think I'm kidding, but it's crazy. It's like GIF and GIF. You know, it's one of those things. Yeah, it's terrifying. Okay. All right. I'm pretty flexible. I've dealt with enough programmers of all types and sorts in different languages. By now, that's a battle I won't pick up on when we're compromised for time. So, in the interest of such, I will move on. So, there are a few things I do want to mention, and you'll see as I go through like more of the lecture piece of things. Today, I really wanted, because of our problems, our fail on Discord last time, I wanted to kind of go through things kind of step by step and recover a little bit of ground here. So we may cover them again as we get into some of the C# programming proper lecture bits. But I wanted to draw your attention a little bit to kind of what's going on with some naming here. Here, I did commit a crime. Okay. The crime I committed is this should be called my method with a capital M. Okay. Some of this will be actually enforced by Unity, and some of it will be, like enable some additional functionality in Unity, and there's going to be just certain things that it's going to want to know. But basically, we're going to talk about what we call naming conventions, and much like formatting conventions, some of this is up to taste. But I'm going to recommend that you follow these things, and because there's a method to the madness here. Okay. You'll notice the game manager, the mono behavior, the Unity engine, and these functions all have a capital letter as their first letter, right? And we are doing something called, you can sometimes, depending, it can be called Camel Case or Pascal Case, depending on what's going on in the very beginning. But anyway, it's kind of sort of referred to as Camel Case because we have these capitalizations occurring within these words that kind of give the humps of the camel kind of thing going on. But it makes it easier to read, right? Game Manager, I can read that a little bit easier, especially as you get, 3 and 4 word compositions going on. So we like to capitalize words within names. So always capitalize subsequent words within names. But at the beginning, if there is a function or a built-in type or like a built-in class, things that generally you're not modifying or are not modifiable, those should be capitalized. Okay. You would never change the name of a function once your program is running, right? You would never be doing this and then this and then, like just changing the name kind of for no good reason, or referring to it and modifying it. Not even just modifying the name, but even you wouldn't say start equals something, right? Start equals 1. That's an error. Like you can't change the name of that function like that. And as we get into pointers, and maybe we'll argue about that another day. But generally, things that are like that are kind of at that level get capitalized. If, on the other hand, I had a variable, variables, we like to have them start off lowercase. So if I said float my position, that's fine. This is something I'm going to be saying my position equals 0. My position equals 4. This is a variable. It's being changed. We like to have variables with lowercase names. One other thing that is kind of a special case, though, are some of the C# bits in here. So when we have C# decorations and variable types and so on, those will be lowercase as well, because those are at a whole nother level of importance and things, and Unity can't come along and decide to change that. So that's a little bit of code formatting and best practices with regards to kind of readability of things. You'll see that hopefully will be fairly consistent in that sort of way. All right. So I'm going to clean up these bits of code here, turn them back to the way they were. I'm not going to use my position yet. But anyway, here we are. So we have in here these two functions, one called start and one called update. And start is called when the scene begins and when this object comes into existence and starts doing useful stuff. And update is called once per frame. So every time a frame needs to be drawn on the screen, that's determined by how efficient the code is, how fast your hardware runs, how many hertz your monitor is. That can depend on a lot of different things, but it's going to happen quite often, generally 60 times plus a second. Right? Start will happen basically once when the scene starts. So let's write some code. Let's say, okay, print. We finally get to write hello world. In C#, we have semicolons at the end of every line or every command, like that, generally every line. We call functions by, and this is a system built-in function, which is why this one happens to be lowercase, right? Weird. If I did say proper way to do it, debug log, this is the more proper Unity officially way to do it, like that. So here I am calling a function. I use the parentheses to say, okay, calling a function. And then in this case, I'm passing it a string, and a string is designated by these double quotes, right? So let's save that. Save that. I decide, push it over to the side here. I come back to my program, my project, and I press updates the database. And I press play. And what happens? Well, I went into play mode. I can still press these buttons. I don't see a lot going on. Now, one thing you probably want to do, you may not have been launched into the kind of the maximized mode here, but you'll see if I go to the game window, it has this maximize on play thing sort of selected. It was selected for me by default. I'm going to turn that off so that I can continue to see everything else around it. So I'll press play again. That's fun for when you're really play testing, but not so much when you're debugging. So now it went back into the game mode, and it is, in fact, running. And where did someone say something, or am I just echoing? What's it doing? Did you? I will in a moment, but first, before I do that, I just want to say, okay, in the console window, this is where the output is, right? And it's been put once there, right? So I can see there's just one message from that particular game manager, that object, and its start method called that debug log, right? So it's giving me a bunch of information here about kind of what's going on. Now, for those of you who I just went too fast, and I'll hit that. What did I do? Come on. I'm clicking around way too fast here. Stop. All right. And there we go. So what happened? Is it, so it's within here. It's within the start. You have these in your, So what exactly is the error that's giving? All right, so, all right. If you have system diagnostics, what additional things do you have at the top of your screen there? You have get rid of everything but these three. I'm not quite sure why it added that. That's interesting. So, okay. So when in doubt, these are the three most basic things that you were going to use. I'm not sure. Yes, print instead will work as well. So that is interesting. So there must be some sort of new diagnostics library thing that it's added there. Yeah, sometimes as new versions of Unity come out, they'll add some additional functionality and it will get slightly weird. I'm surprised that that's doing that though. You don't happen to have Bolt installed on your machine, do you? You do. Okay. I wonder if that's potentially causing it. I hadn't seen. Okay, let's say maybe it is because of Bolt being there, or something about the particular configuration of Bolt. Because obviously, with the visual programming language, it's a little bit trickier, and we have some different debugging types, which we'll get into. So for now, let's do that though. Let's say that we want to, when in doubt, just use this piece of things. All right. Does that right? The problem is that it's basically been defined in both places and it doesn't know exactly which one to be using. So if you modify the Unity, well, yeah, that's true. If you said that would work as well. You could say Unity. If you said using Unity engine.debug, I think that would get rid of the other one. Is that what you did? Okay. So you're basically, what you're doing, what you just did is you got rid of the ambiguity. You said using Unity engine.debug, and then it said, okay, in that case, I'm not going to bother even considering this other one. Okay. So that's sort of, we can either get rid of what's causing the ambiguity because you're adding those additional things that we're not using yet, or we can say using Unity engine dot diagnostics, was that, or debug, Unity engine. Am I not getting completion on that one? Which version of Unity are you on? And this works out okay for you. I wonder. Interesting. We'll have to come back to that. I'm not quite sure. The easiest thing to do is just, for now, just use the ones that we explicitly want to use, and don't use the system diagnostic stuff. Just keep that out of there for now. All right. So hopefully now everyone is able to print debug or print hello world. Either one will work. So if we put that same code inside of update, what's going to happen is it's going to run, and we're going to get print hello world printed lots and lots and lots and lots of times, which is something I'll leave you to experiment with on your own. So we won't worry about that. So instead, let's jump back to the thing that's going to be important, which is how do we have code work across components, and how do we have code that's going to be triggered by another event? And in this case, we're going to want to hook some code up specifically to that. We want to have the game manager code called from a button. Okay, so we're going to write a bit of functionality in here called a button was pressed. And it will just print a So now I have a function. And as I mentioned before, if I don't say anything else, so it gave me this void because I'm not returning any value. And if I don't tell it that it's public, it's also going to be private. So no one will know about this, which isn't good because I want it to be called by some other bit of functionality, right? I want it to be called by another component. So in order for the outside world to see this method that's part of this class, I need to say it is public. Now that will make it viewable from the outside world. The other parts of my program could potentially see that now. If I just run the program right now, nothing's going to happen because nobody's connected to that. There's no automatic connection like there was with start and with update. It's just a function that I have defined on my own, which has no connection to anything else in the game engine unless we connect it. So let's do that. So we have these two buttons, and thankfully, now Bolt is going to give me some other issues. Yeah, I think depending on how you do the namespace, or yeah, Bolt is almost awesome. It can lend itself to some weird messages left and right. So anyway, sorry, never mind. So we have this game manager, we have the scene. Let's go back to the scene hierarchy, and we have this button here, and we'll call this one, first one. Let's call it button 1, and let's make the text on it just something so we can make sense of it. You see, here's the text there, and I will call this button 1 text, just so I can now tell the difference. Right? So this is button 1. And what I want to have is, if button 1 is pressed, I want that other code to get called. So the cool thing about this button component here is that it has a way of signaling to other functionality through this on-click event. It's going to have an event that happens, and it's going to potentially, we can add subscribers here or add other functions here to be triggered when that is pressed. So you see, for starters, list is empty. So I'm clicking on button 1, and I can come over here and say, okay, on click, I'm going to press add, and it's going to add some functionality, but there's no object yet and no function yet. And you have lots of choices here. If you're very good with your mouse, or reasonably good with your mouse, you can go up and click on drag. You're going to need to click and drag. Don't let go of the button here. You can click drag the game manager, because you say, okay, I want this button talking to the game manager, and I'm going to let it go here. Now, if you're not as good at dragging stuff over, you can also lock the inspector window, in which case, as I click on things over here, it doesn't go away. But so I can click the game manager and drag that over here. Or the third one is to click on this little target, and you can click on that, and it will show you the things that are in your asset folder or in your scene, and you can choose the game manager there. You can turn them into icons. I recommend always going and shrinking these things down to the smallest thing and just using the game manager there. All right, so now the button knows to talk to the game manager object, but it has no idea what the conversation should really look like. Right? It just knows that this object or this component of this object is talking to this other object. So we have to be more specific. And now over here, you see this no function. Here's where we can sort of start to drill down. And you'll see that we have game object, transform, and game manager, which just so happen to be, if I unlock this and I look at the game manager, you'll see it's got its game object, its transform, and its game manager script, right? So the elements of the component there. So if we go back to the button and we see those things, here's potentially those things I can interact with. Right? The things that are intrinsically part of the game object, its transform, and then the game manager that I have created. And you'll see, in addition to the functions that I create, like in this case, let's see, hopefully it's in there. A button was pressed. a bunch of other functions and methods and properties are exposed, which are just kind of part of the mono behavior and part of the class that gets normally exposed. But the one I'm most interested in is this a button was pressed. That's the function that I wrote. So now if I click that, it'll say, when this is clicked, talk to this game manager object, talk to its game manager component, and call the a button was pressed method. So now, finally, if I run the game, I press the button, you'll see down here, and also within the console window, see it's happened 7 times now, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that code is being called across the 2 objects down into that component and into that method on that component. Okay. So that's sort of some of the basic ways to get inside of the plumbing of Unity and get scripts to be called by other objects and components and so on. Now, the first game that we're going to create, we're going to rely almost entirely on buttons and text within here. So we can kind of focus on the basics without getting kind of sidetracked by wanting to create graphics and wanting to get, into physics and so on. We're going to really focus on learning programming structure and kind of minimizing what we do in the interface. So the way we're going to do that is the basic interaction is going to be in the form of a directional pad that we're going to use. We're going to create using buttons. We're not going to use the Unity input system. We're not going to use joystick or keyboard or anything like that. We're only going to use buttons. So one easy thing to do is we'll say, here's button 1, here's button 2, and then I can even press Control D, which will give me another button, and Control D will give me yet another button. And then you'll notice I now have 4 buttons that are laid out. It's sort of like a directional pad would be. I've, north, south, east, west, or north, south, east, west, or up, down, left, right, or forward, back, whatever you want to call them. You have 4 buttons. Okay. And you can sort of get fancy if you like. I'm going to go back to the hierarchy and double click on the canvas so I get a better feeling for what this is going to look like. Remembering, of course, that I switched my game into 16:9 mode, and I should probably set this to scale with screen size. And everything looks reasonably, it's assuming 800 by 600 resolution. It's okay. So as long as everything is on the screen at this point, I don't need to change these. So now you'll see, okay, now if I do modify my window sizes, everything will scale like I expect it to, right? So that's what I recommend. As sort of the default way is you say, okay, the scene, the game should be a 16:9 aspect ratio game. And the canvas should scale with the size of the screen, and it should overlay the screen. Okay. So just review that piece of it. All right. So we can go back to the scene. You can lay that out however you like. Grab those, move them, and so on and so on. Yeah, my mouse is being a little bit odd. And now if I look at button 1, that was the one that was talking to Game Manager, a button was pressed. Now, what if I wanted another one to do that same thing? I certainly could. I could click that button, say, oh, okay, here's another list. All right, let me add that same Game Manager. Okay. And have it call that same Game Manager, a button was pressed. I'll hit play. And if I watch the console window, I can see that is my original one. And then I can press that one, and that is calling the same code as well. So those two call the code, these two don't. Everybody follow? Now, here's where we start to get fancy. So we say, okay, well, there should be potentially things that happen differently as a result of it going north, south, east, or west, or something like that. Right now, I don't seem to have the ability to do that because all I can do is trigger a function. Now, So introducing a C#, yet another C# concept for us here, is you'll probably remember print here got past an argument. It got past a string. All right, so functions are normally, quite often, functions are past some argument or set of arguments to work on. So maybe I say up here, a button was pressed and I want to pass it something. I want to give it something to work with. So I'm going to say, oh, okay, I want to pass into you an integer. And I'm going to call that integer ordinal. It could be called anything, direction, something, north, south, east. Well, I'm going to give it a name. And this says, okay, now I've got a function or a method that is going to expect to be passed some parameter, an integer here. And I'm going to get a little bit fancier now with my print. I'm going to put a little bit of space. And the nice thing about C# is it'll let you get away with this. It's not original. Can everyone still hear me? I think my headphones are starting to go dead. So if that happens, I'll figure that out. All right. It's going to drive me insane. I'm going to have to switch. It's already beeping like. All right, 1 second here. Can somebody say something just in case? Oh, I guess we haven't switched yet. Hello? Hello? Okay, I think that's working. Can someone say something? Okay, good. I'll apologize for any kind of feedback you get. Hopefully we won't get too much. Okay, so we're at the point where we're saying, okay, a function can get past an argument. And the argument I'm going to pass here is an integer. We're going to talk more about argument types later. If any of you do have your microphones on, be careful, just because we may get into a feedback thing if we're not too careful. Let's see.
Professor, you don't have to cast it as a string. Put it in the first statement, or does it matter?
No, it will do the right thing here. It should do the right thing. Normally it does the right thing. Today it'll probably do something different just to give me a hard time, but normally it'll let me get away with that. I'm assuming these are just my usual bolt errors. And I'm going to press play. Now, you'll notice now no longer can I see the results over here because it doesn't really know what to do. It's become confused. Because last time around, I told it to expect a function that didn't take any parameters, whereas now we have a function that takes parameters. And C# is persnickety about that. It's careful about that. It wants the parameters to match kind of what's going on here. So if I come back to my button, and let's go the first button, and now I come back and I say game manager, you'll see it's changed. It says, a button was pressed being passed an integer. And the one that was left here, it didn't have that. So now we can do that. We'll say, a button was passed an integer. And we'll fix that in the other one as well. Game manager, a button was passed integer. Now, did anyone see what just happened as well? It also added this extra field here for both of those. And that allows me to determine what is that integer that I'm passing. So I'm going to leave the first one at 0 and make the second one 1. Whoops. Or asterisk. No, don't press asterisk. 1. No, 1. There we go. So now, the cool thing about that is if I press play, and I look at the console, you'll see now a button was pressed, 0. And then I press this button, a button was pressed, 1. 0, 1, 0, 1. And I'll tell it to not collapse those. Don't collapse. 0, 1, 0, 1. Okay. So not only am I allowed to trigger these events, I'm allowed to pass parameters to them. Okay. So that's how that happened. I think used to be that you could only pass a single parameter, so you can't get too carried away in terms of what you're doing there. But it's a very convenient way to do things like this. So in the case of starting to develop a directional pad to move the character in a certain direction or move around in the game, I might say, okay, you notice I named them ordinal. So 0 is north, 1 is east. So I probably want this one to be, maybe this one will be 2. So I'll add to my list. Game manager. So that I'll make that one 2. And this last one will be 3. So now when I press play in my game, 2, 3, 1, 0. So now things can start to get interesting. I can do stuff in my code inside my game manager that's going to depend on the value of that ordinal. I could say, okay, I can start to think conditionally. I could say if ordinal equals 1 or equals 0, and I'm going to put some pseudocode here. I would say, or I just have a comment, move north. Else if ordinal 1 move east, and so on. Now we're going to talk a lot more about structure, else's and whiles and so on and so forth as we get there. But you can imagine if I were to cut and paste here, I'm going to cut and paste to go quickly. Boy, that's some bad formatting. So 1, 2, and 3, and I can have 3 different bits of code in here for each of those cases. So maybe, well, just to north, and I'll cut and paste that. And I will comment out the last version, the last message, because I don't care about that anymore. North, next one is east, next one is south, and the next one is west. Save that. And go back to Unity. Give it a second to catch its breath. And I get north, east, south, and west. So congratulations, have a directional pad now. And I have a function that I can then use to move my player, my virtual player, well, it's always a virtual player, I suppose. The player object that I'm going to cook up, going to move it around in its world, not on the screen, but move it around in its world. Okay. And how we do that will be, let's see, where are we at? We are at 3:47. So there's a few things I want to make sure to take care of. So we'll pause for a moment for some questions and things, but I want to introduce something else. So give yourself a minute. If you haven't gotten that code running, go ahead and try to get that code running. And I'm going to talk to you about this. Okay. So I'm going to share this Google document with you. And you'll notice here, so here's intro to game programming, our lectures here. And I have 2 weeks worth. We have odd weeks and even weeks. Now, this is we're in the second week of class, so I consider this to be the even week. So next week will be an odd week. And what I'd like you to do is sort of first come, first serve. Do not overwrite one another in here. That's bad. So we'll see how this goes. We haven't had any fights break out yet. If you see that someone else has started typing or put their name in and it was a slot that you were really hoping for, leave a comment and we'll work it out peaceably. But this is going to be basically sort of the 10-minute check-in that we're going to have, one-on-one between people. So we're going to try to structure the lectures are basically going to become a lot more structured towards a straight 1-hour lecture with an additional material available that you can kind of view asynchronously in that, or just watch in that other hour sort of thing. So I can have some live interaction with, each of you during those weeks, right? So next week would be this odd week, and then the even week. If there is other time outside of that, it's not out of the question. I do ask that you first fill in one of these and indicate, somewhere on here on Monday, Thursday sort of thing, where you're sort of open as well, just in case, we want to kind of expedite things, because just meeting with you once every 2 weeks isn't the ideal thing. There'll still be open office hours and that sort of thing. So here's what I'm going to do. So brace yourselves here. I'm sure there's going to be just an immediate run. I'm going to post this over on Discord. You ready? Okay. If you've read the syllabus and things, you'll probably have heard about, wanting to do check-ins basically with each of you on a regular basis, basically every other week, right? So that I can kind of see where you're at, because we're all remote and I don't get to see your faces in the classroom, and I don't get to kind of, it's tough for me to walk around the classroom and peer over normally I would be kind of looking over your shoulders to see how you're doing on your projects and things. So this is the way to have a designated time that's during class time, so you don't have to set aside additional time necessarily at a specific time, so that I can say, okay, show me where you're at. How are things going? Show me any issues. What are your ideas for your projects, and so on? Kind of the check-ins. All right. So you just sign up for one slot. It is during the normal class hours. Whoops, I'm knocking my lunch over here. It's just during the normal class hours, so it shouldn't be any additional time crunch is the idea to avoid. Okay. And this is my way of also, saying, okay, it's sort of the class participation and attendance is that, I'll know you're at least in that class. So I will have concrete evidence that you're at least at 1 out of every 4 classes. And certainly paying attention, because I'm going to be checking on, sort of progress that way as we're moving through things. Does that sort of make sense? Okay. All right. So we'll see how it goes. Subject to, we're in a new world. We're doing new things. We're making it up as we go along to some degree. So I'd love to meet with everybody every week or every class, but if it's just saying, okay, 10 minutes seems like a reasonable chunk of time. And with 20 plus people in the class, that's of course 200 minutes, which is 3 hours plus at least, moving into things. And we have, so I've carved 50 minutes out of each class for a total of 200 minutes, and we're going to work it out somehow. All right. Okay. So that's that. I see people filling out, so you're doing the right thing. All right. Like I said, don't overwrite anyone. You certainly should. I think we should be able to fit everybody. So just choose a slot. You're supposed to be around for those slots anyway. If you have any issues, send me a direct message over in the Discord. We can work it out. So, all right. So in the interest of sort of wrapping things up, we have about another 25 minutes. So we're in pretty good shape. And we've set the groundwork here really for being able to interact with the Unity program in sort of an interesting way, in that we have buttons that are dedicated towards certain things. And we have one bit of way of kind of letting the users know what's going on, which is over here through the console window, which is certainly not ideal. And if you have an executing running game, that's going to be of no use at all, actually, because print statements, the console window, that's not showing up in the game. It's what's in this window over here that's showing up in the game. So that's kind of important. All right. So now what we're going to do next is this is going to get a little bit deeper, a little bit crazier, but it's going to introduce a little bit more of not just calling functions on other components, but really interacting with the various properties and data that they can kind of communicate with one another or use across one another. Okay. So you have this interface now, hopefully, this button 1, button 2, button 3, button 4. And what we're going to do next is we're going to add another element to our game. So we'll go to the hierarchy and we'll collapse the canvas. I'm going to just say create another UI element called text. Don't use Text Mesh Pro, just use text for now. So we'll say text and put text right there in the middle of the screen and grow the text box just so that it's definitely got enough room to put some stuff in it. Okay. And maybe even for starters, to make life easier, we'll kind of make it wide here at the bottom here. So we have a text box that contains text that's just called text. And this is clearly too many things called text, which is annoying, but it just sort of, that's the way it is. We'll get through it. So what I'd like to do immediately is we'll rename some things, and we'll say, okay, this is actually the main message object. We'll call it the main message object. That'll make life a little bit easier. Okay, so we have this main message object. And the goal will be to be able to press one of these buttons and have that text, north, south, east, west, show up in that box, right? So we have to modify this property of this component on this object, on this main message object. So how do we do that? Interesting. So all four of these buttons are using a single function right now. So it would be awfully nice to, instead of this print, use some other function. And let's call this, we'll just call it void update, or maybe even change main message. Okay. We have this function called change main message. And these are going to call change main message instead of calling print. It's not chain. That's a good one. Not chain. Wow. Still doesn't like that. Change. Oh, I know why. We have to tell it it's going to take a string to be our message. Right? Here's that string. We're going to pass it north, south, east, west, whatever. Okay. That's why I get kind of confused. Okay. So instead of the print, it's going to call this function here and do something. It's going to change main message or print main message or something. We just have no idea how to change that yet because we don't have that kind of connection to that. So let's get fancy. And now we know that there's another object out there in the world that somehow we want to connect to this. So in addition to being able to define these functions in here, or methods in here of this class, we can also define data. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, well, I want a reference to a game object. And I want this to be that main message thing, right? We'll call it main message. And I'll call it ref just for now, because it's going to be a reference to that main message. And it's a game object. And let's see, if I want anyone else to be able to refer to this, I have to do what? I have to make it public. All right. So now potentially here I can manipulate that main message ref. I can do stuff. Right? But I don't have that reference. There it is, but I can do stuff to it. So let me save that script. And here is our other really interesting foothold into communicating back and forth between Unity objects. So we'll look at the game manager again where that code lives, because we know that's where the code lives. That's where things are going to have happen. We need to let that code know something about some things that are going on in the scene here. So let me click on the game manager and let's look over here at game manager script. Can everyone see this okay? Nope, because let's see, I got to move my window because my smiling face is on top of that. Could warn me about that. Everybody still here? Okay, we're running out of time, so I got to be quick. So you'll see now that here is that main message ref. It has exposed it because I declared it to be public. So the Unity interface, the Unity editor can actually see that as well as other C# programs and scripts and so on. So I can see that and I say, oh, okay, well, what I want to have, it's just as easy as this. It says, okay, where's that main message text? Ah, it's nowhere. Why? Because no, wait, it is there. What happened?
You closed your canvas thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay, sorry. I was thinking, all right, good point. I wasn't as bad as I thought I was. I thought I did that it was in play mode. That's usually what happens. So we'll click on the game manager and so now we can either click on the target or we can drag that main message directly here and say, okay, here's my reference to that main message. So now my game manager script knows it will automatically have assigned a reference there. So now I can refer to this to get at that main message. Kind of cool. So all I have to do is actually manipulate it now. I said I was going to do stuff to it, so let's do some stuff to it. Here's where Intellisense or the IntelliCompletion stuff is your best friend, because you don't have to remember anything. Well, you have to remember how to get there in the first place. But let's say, all right, now main message ref, that's the game object that I want to deal with. And I hit dot. Now what dot means is that, okay, now I want to look at either some method or some property of that object, right? That's what that dot is referring to. We're going to look at a method or a property of this object. And you'll see here I have, all kinds of neat stuff. I can change if it's active. I can change the transformation. I could get a component of it. I could change its name, or I get access to its name, all sorts of different things, right? Now, it just so happens that I know that what I want to do is there is a child component. There's a component on that main message object that is a text component. So what I want to do is I want to say get component. So I want to get what? I want to get the text component. Now, this is odd, or it's not so odd. I'll tell you why it's odd, or it seems odd. So I think I come here and I click on my main message, and it has a text component. But when I come here, I try to type text, and it doesn't have a text component, or I can't deal with a text component, because this is one of those other cases where we want to tell Unity that we want to use unityengine.ui, right? We explicitly want to use do some things to the user interface here. Oh, I think my keyboard is starting to go now too. Talk about a day for stuff running out of batteries. So now you'll notice that text suddenly became wonderful and blue and happy. So it says, all right, we're going to try to get a text component of this object. We'll get fancier. We haven't finished this line yet. You'll notice it's complaining. At a minimum, I need to put a semicolon at the end, but that wouldn't really do anything. I would just have gotten the component, and I haven't changed anything. So to actually change something, I now can get that component. I've gotten the component, and that's yet another object or class. So I can hit dot again, because I want to manipulate a property of that component. And you'll see it just so happens that IntelliCode here has offered me a very likely thing that I want to change called text. And I can go so far as to say I want to set the text of that component of that object to be that message that I got from over here. Now, we're going to go in a lot more explanation of all of these things, and even of all this structure. I just wanted to, to give you some concrete feels with regards to things happening here. So we come back over to the editor. We should update. We hit play. And now, if all went well, you'll see here, north, east, south, west. So now we've got feedback to the user about what direction they're heading in. It's a very, very simple interface, but we've already started plunging the depths of kind of the whole Unity component and object system and manipulating properties of objects using their methods and passing values. And we've even done some event kind of programming and so on and so on. And these are the kind of fundamental pieces that we're going to use all over the place when it gets to whether they're actually sprites on the screen and colliders and sounds and so on and so on and so on and so on. All right, but these are the main sorts of things. And we'll end it there. It's a nice big chunk of information. If you want to look for stuff on Googling, or the playlist that I sent out that I referenced in notes and resources, that was day 2, you'll notice there was a playlist of the Summer Arch, which is a playlist of the entire course already. So if you do find, or if you want to skip ahead or see what issues we came across, or even I think there's some, additional material on, setting buttons or different take on it, slightly older version of Unity. That's available as well. So you can always kind of go look at that, or certainly use Google and certainly, watch other things. The interesting thing, and I stress this especially to the game dev students later on, is that the tools are always changing. The availability of different things, everything is always changing. New resources are coming online. It's like Unity Learn, which is also available right now. So one of the key things that as game programmers or game developers that you're going to be having to deal with that a lot of other people don't necessarily have to deal with, or other subjects don't have to deal with, is like, for instance, if you learn calculus hasn't really changed much in the last 10, 20, 30, 40, 100 years. Whereas game development and the tools that we're dealing at, they change overnight, seemingly. So one of the key critical skills that you're going to need to master is your ability to find out stuff and debug stuff and use critical analysis to say, okay, why did this go wrong? Read those text messages, read those error messages, check the console message. Okay, what does this seem to imply? Why did this code go wrong? And do that sort of thing. So to kind of step outside the comfort area all the time. That's one of the key skills I'm going to stress a lot is, like, okay, sure, come to me with your questions, and I'm not going to shame flute or, there's no wrong questions. Please do. But as you move on, it's going to be, critical to your success to be able to apply those sort of that sort of sleuthing to debugging things. And we'll talk about, even how to use the debugger. That's the Visual Studio debugger and all that kind of great stuff. All right. I've probably gotten right to the edge. Did I go over the edge? Oh, no, I haven't. I've used up my time with a little bit to spare there. So I'll open it up to questions at that point. Otherwise, I'll let you leave a little early. How would that be? Leave or leave the stream? How are we doing? I actually jump back to the other. I'm in notes and resources at the moment. Where is fall? There we go.
So in terms of our first homework, quote unquote, but like we're not expected to have anything on that yet, right? Like, are we still learning?
That's correct. That's correct. What I'm assuming by the time I start to check in with you that you should have some code that you've followed along with to kind of start setting things up. You should be making progress. You should not. What I don't want to have happen is that people are writing their projects, doing their projects the night before. I want to see steady progress throughout. So certainly right now you should be at the point where hopefully you have Unity installed. You're starting to put together some things on the canvas. I'm going to also next week, I'm going to put some template stuff to kind of, for the one project to rule them all sort of thing, so that you can kind of change scenes and use these buttons and things to kind of create a more overall architecture for all the projects. But don't worry, do start thinking about, how to use buttons and so on. And if you do want to refer back to the other project and start working on from that, by all means do. But don't worry. The first couple of weeks is definitely usually some growing pains and getting used to it and going through all the install steps and it being a pain in the butt and that sort of thing. And then we can, the first project is really to kind of shake out any bugs in the latest version of Unity and kind of things. The second, third, and fourth projects are really where things get, fun and challenging and interesting. I mean, the first one's fun and interesting too. You'd be surprised. A lot of people having certain constraints on the project makes it very interesting.
Are you going to start checking in as soon as next Tuesday, or definitely
That is right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm going to start going by the check-in list starting next Tuesday. Right.
I have a question about the button.
Yeah.
So I was able to get the console to work, and I was able to get the text to work.
Mm-hmm.
For some reason, when I do the drop-down menu for the button for the unplug, like I set it to the game manager, and then for the function, I don't see the function to choose from. I just see no function or monoscript.
Double check. Did you declare it to be public?
Yeah, I declared it as public void button.
If there's this happens to me, if there's a syntax error or something like that, then it won't show up. It won't show up unless it's a runnable.
Right. Every time you save your code, Unity will try to compile it, and if it fails, it's not going to update all those things.
When I run the game, or the run for the game, like the rest of the scripts work fine.
Well, it might be what happened is, like, since it compiles it, there might be a cached version of the version that actually worked there, right? So it could be a little bit odd. Does the console say anything about any compilation errors or warnings?
It just prints up the
It should. So wait, when you say so what is happening? Say that again.
So like, yeah, that on-click little
Yeah.
area when you put it. So I put runtime only, and then I click for the object to click on game manager.
Mm-hmm.
And then so when I'm trying to select the function, so on the top right,
Mm-hmm.
that dialog option, it only has either no function or monoscript. And those are the only things it goes.
Okay, the game manager that you've assigned it to here. Yeah. How did you drag that? Did you go to the scene and select that?
I have that issue too. When I dragged it, it worked, but when I tried to deal with the scene, it turned out.
Okay, what might have happened if you dragged it from assets, you might have seen it in your assets and seen game manager in there. It sounds like you've got a reference directly to the script and not to the game manager object, right? This is one of the things that it's a little bit of a pain. So if I did this, if I said, and this would look like, say I drag this game manager there, this is probably what's happening, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So somehow you've gotten a reference to the script in your assets folder and not to the object in your scene. Okay. So if you click this again, make sure you're always choosing scene. You see, right there it is as the game manager script. But if I click on scene, that's the game manager object.
Yeah, so I tried that and it worked.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Cool. It's always good when it works. I think I broke mine. What did I do? Oh, no, there it is. All right. And on that note, have a great weekend. Reach out to me. And I will try to catch up with Francisco. You're the one having the problem with, we'll talk after this. So hopefully we can get you through that one way or another. All right. Have a great weekend. Stay, play by the rules. Have a great time, but don't, well, you know what I mean. These days, there's so many warnings and references going around to, like, last thing I want to hear about is disciplinary actions. All that kind of great stuff. All right, take care. Have a great weekend.
Thank you.